On behalf of Lake Country Clean Waters and the Board of Directors, I welcome you tonight and thank you for joining us. I'm John Macy, President of Lake Country Clean Waters, and I'm serving as the moderator for tonight's meeting. This is our December quarterly meeting, and the topic we've chosen is wake enhancement from different viewpoints. I'd like to do a special thanks to Don Gallo for putting the program together, and for Carolyn Joyce, Paul Moyer, and Beth Holford Jesso for coordinating and putting on the program. Some of us have gathered here at the Tall Pine headquarters, and we'd also like to thank Tall Pines for partnering with us. Becky Fedrick, the incoming executive director, and Susan Buchanan, the outgoing executive director, have always partnered with the Lake Country Clean Waters and been very helpful to us. We please ask that you put your questions in the chat, and as time allows, we will address the same. As a reminder, as most of you already know, we're an education organization. We don't take positions, and we're not here to advocate, but we went to great lengths to make sure that all viewpoints would be presented tonight in a respectful and direct manner. And as I said, we're hoping that all issues will be heard. Starting off will be viewpoint number one, the science. As many of you know who've been involved in this issue since we have, for almost a year now, I think, Don, we've been waiting for the final University of Minnesota St. Anthony Falls lab. And in fact, we originally scheduled this, again, as many of you will remember, we were going to do this in June, but unfortunately the science wasn't done, and we didn't think it would be appropriate to do the program without having the science. So tonight, to present where we're at with the science and the status of the phase 1 and phase 2 studies, we have Justin Poinsett from SewerPAC and Thomas Slawski, the chief biologist at SewerPAC, who have done their own studies and have done a lot of work in this area. And so we welcome them and we thank them for joining us and presenting the viewpoint of the science. Gentlemen?
Thanks for that introduction. And excuse me. As you mentioned, my name is Tom Slawski, and my colleague Justin and I put this presentation together. And although we are going to share some of the findings we've done with some local lakes in the nearshore area, in the region area, I should say, I would like to point out that Justin and I are biologists. We are not engineers, and so this is wave mechanics is not, and fluid hydraulics is not our specialty of study. Justin's a botanist, and I am a stream ecologist and focused on fisheries, biology, and habitat enhancement. So with that said, we've been asked to present the status of the science as we understand it based on peer-reviewed and published information. And with that too, Justin is going to talk more specifically about that phase 1 and proposed phase 2 study. But I'm going to start out a little bit just on the background of some generalized boating impacts, because we felt that it was important to just summarize those. So with that, Justin, yeah, you can hit the next slide. And so just as background, of course, just as outboard motors are getting bigger and the boats are getting bigger, and the last count, our population estimate in the Southeast region is now over 2 million people. So we're also just getting more overpopulated, and so recreation in general is just seeing that increased dynamic with the number of people, and we're not making more lakes. And so I think Bob Korth at Extension mentioned that many times, but that impact in sheer numbers, we love our lakes to death, but sometimes it's a factor that recreation is becoming more of a stressor on a lot of our water bodies. And I will talk a little bit more about shoreline erosion in a minute, and Justin's gonna talk more about wake enhancing boats. But two things are very important in that: the ballast tanks are designed, of course, to increase boat weight, to keep them lower in the water, and the V-hull shape design hydrofoil create larger wakes that shape the wave. And he's going to talk more details about that later on. So Justin, go ahead, next slide. And boating impacts in general are well known, well documented, actually. There's been a number of studies, and I forgot to mention that all of the citations here are going to be included in some slides at the end, so you don't have to try and write any of these down, and we'll try to detail all those at the back end. But many of them are DNR studies, as well as researchers. In particular, Tim Asplin has done a lot of work earlier in his career, and both its direct scour and damage to aquatic vegetation, as we all know. Just go to any lake after a weekend and see all the floaters washing up on shores. Increased phosphorus, of course, and decrease in clarity and shoreline erosion are all very much well documented to be an artifact of boating. The next slide, Justin. And in addition, there have been also some detailed studies on sediment disturbance, and they found that most of that does occur in the shallow water depths, not surprising, and at near planing boat speeds. And of course, larger boats with larger motors and drafts create more velocities and can create higher velocities for resuspension of sediments. And the graphic there shows minimum velocities for bed disturbance, both modeled and observed, and boat speeds. And for those of you like me, I can't think in centimeters per second, but 30 centimeters per second roughly equates to about 1 foot per second. So you get a sense that those are not huge velocities for the resuspension of those sediments. And there's pretty good agreement, actually, except resuspension of sediments happens at much lower velocities than even what was thought to be modeled. So, but you can see that boat speeds definitely have an impact on sediment resuspension there. So, next slide, Justin. And other boating impacts, we're not going to spend a lot of time on invasive species transmission, but clearly we are good transmitters. We are good travelers, and we have hitchhikers that come with us. I've personally witnessed, in my early undergraduate career, this thing called the zebra mussel, working at the University of Michigan with Dr. Lehman, who was a Great Lakes biologist. And sadly, over my career, have witnessed the devastation of that species, both in the Great Lakes and the progression into the lakes in Wisconsin when I arrived here in the 90s. So these things have real impacts, and they affect our ecology, fish and waterfowl and habitat, as well as, directly through boat strikes or pollutants, oil exhaust, and destruction of nesting sites. So boating is important, recreation is important, but it does bear the question, what is considered acceptable level of boating impact to lakes? And so it is a challenge. And but reality is, we don't have loons on our lakes in Southeast because of that disturbance. They're limited to lakes up north. So that's just part of the reality of boating. Justin, next slide. And again, Tim Asplin in his 2000 study did a lot of work. And so both the mechanism of from emission to exhaust, propeller impacts, turbulence, wakes and waves, noise, disturbance, and direct movement can affect water clarity, turbidity and nutrients and algae, metals, hydrocarbon, and other pollutants, as well as shoreline erosion, direct impacts to macrophytes and fisheries, wildlife, all species, birds, mammals, frogs, and reptiles, as well as human enjoyment as well, air quality, peace, quiet, safety, and crowding. So these impacts are very well documented in there. And you can go to the next slide, Justin. And I want to talk a little bit about shoreline. We know that shoreline impacts are caused by wind-generated waves and boat-generated waves, as well as heavy ice damage from heaving. We know those are important impacts and have gotten many complaints and tried to do a number of studies throughout the region over the course of my career. And those things, of course, are exacerbated by flooding and high water levels. And so these are challenges. And from that, you can go to the next slide, Justin. From around the region. And as part of the normal watershed level plans that we've been doing over the years as Sewer Pack, we have been documenting not every lake, but the lakes that we happen to be working on and got funding to do watershed management plans for, or aquatic plant management plans. We've been quietly mapping shore structure, both armoring through riprap or bulkheads or revetments, as well as natural and wetland features. And this is an example here on Kesis Lake. And this happens to be 1998. And I think our first survey was done in the early 80s on Fowler Lake, but this is of course, direct reflection of boating and other impacts on these lakes to protect the infrastructure and importantly, land use and structures on the nearshore areas of the lake. And you can see some of the only areas on Kesis there that are still unarmored are usually large tracts of state land or park or embayments where there's slow no wake. You can go to the next slide, Justin. And just as examples, so the concrete bulkheads you can see there, an example, and then some fieldstone and or flagstone riprap there on the other side, and then we get combinations, all kind of combinations of all in between for hard armoring. But that's what I mean by the hard armoring that we mapped on these water bodies. And with that, and you can go to the next slide, I just looked at time trends for a few selected lakes, and you can see the percent armored there on the y-axis and the year, and you can see our lakes range from anywhere from 15 to 20% armored to Pewaukee takes the lead there at 97% armored. But that was as of, I think most importantly, I wanted to show as of 2000, like on Pewaukee Lake. And many lakes like Fowler Lake had been armored up to nearly 70% since the late 80s. And mostly once those, you can see not much changes in Fowler Lake over time. Freeze Lake shifted from maybe 50 to 70%, Upper Nemaben from about 35 to 45%. And most strikingly is Pine Lake between 1996 and 2008. It jumped from 25% armored to 75% armored. So that equates to about 3.35 miles of shoreline were armored over that 12-year period. And that did coincide with the construction and improvement of the the Pine Lake public boat access that was installed by 1995. So this just gives you a bit of a sense for these lakes and their different vulnerabilities to shoreline protection and to existing, boating activity throughout the region. And you'll note that Justin's going to talk about this in a minute, but so the fact that many of our lakes are very well armored kind of obscures some of the boating impacts that we could be seeing. And so it's just something important to keep in mind that we have been responding to pressures on our lake long before the wake boats have started here. So anyway, with that, Justin, I think it's your turn.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Hope y'all can hear me okay. So since we're the first talk up, I thought I'd just try to provide a bit of introduction onto wake sports. I wasn't that familiar with wake sports until a couple years ago. Just try to learn a bit more about it. So I've heard different people talk about when this kind of started and took off. So it looks like wakeboarding began in the 1980s, originally called ski boarding. It was changed to the World Wakeboarding Association in 1991. Then we saw a huge increase in popularity of both wakeboarding and wake surfing in the 1990s and early 2000s. Wake surfing began in the 1950s and 60s, but again, kind of took off in the 1990s. And in the 90s and 2000s, that's when you start to see these boats being designed to kind of help facilitate these sports. You start to see the bow systems, the V-shaped hulls, the wave-shaping fins, all these modifications designed to create a larger wave that you could then surf or board on. So with the increase in popularity in these boats, we've also seen more studies over the years evaluating the impacts of these boats as well as other boats like Tom discussed. And typically in these studies, wake boats are hypothesized to have larger waves and therefore have a greater impact on lake ecosystems than other motorboats would. And they're almost always considered compared to other motorboats, not to kind of the lake without any boat activity. For the most part, these studies have evaluated the impacts on the actual wave characteristics, so the wave height, its energy, its power, and then its impacts on water quality, usually through the resuspension of sediment. Typically, the wake boat or wake surfing boat is compared to a control boat. That could be a water ski boat, could be a pontoon, could be a jet ski, that kind of thing. These studies have been going back quite a while. Some of the earliest ones were in the early 2000s in Australia that I've seen at least, and they've been conducted on a variety of different water bodies, both lakes and rivers, using a lot of different boats, different operating conditions, different water depths, different response variables, and then using different calculations for wave energy and power. And I say that just because it makes it difficult to compare these studies kind of apples to apples because they're all kind of under different scenarios. So what we're going to try to do today is kind of present some of the major findings as they're presented by these studies. And as Tom mentioned, this is not really necessarily like I didn't get a degree in fluid dynamics, so this is stuff I've tried to learn about in the past couple of years as it's been a bigger issue. So the study that's I think most well known recently and most widely discussed is, and John mentioned at the onset, is the study by the St. Anthony Falls Lab at the University of Minnesota. And in this study, they examined the wave in the phase 1. There's actually a phase 2 that's forthcoming, but not out quite yet. They're expecting it, and I'll talk more about it later. In phase 1, they examined the wave height, energy, and power from wake boats compared to control boats, in this case, water ski boats. So a bit about the design. They used one site at Lake Independence in Minnesota, and you can see their site design in the image on the right. They had 2 control boats and 2 wake boats. They operated those boats distances of 225, 325, 425, and 625 feet from shore at both low and high speeds. So both kind of plowing through the water and planing over the water. They then measured waves, or more specifically, they measured the water height at 5 different locations, which you can see labeled on that image as the pads and the masts here. And they measured at really, really high resolution. So as high as 10 times per second, they were measuring effectively wave height. And then they determined the wave heights from those measurements and calculated the wave energy and power from those measurements. So what that looks like in the graph on the left here, on the x-axis is time, and on the y-axis is the water surface elevation. And you can see kind of the water elevation in real time here. And the way you measure a wave is from the trough, which is the lowest point of the wave, to the crest, which is the highest point, and then across its period, which is kind of the start and end of the wave. So if you kind of translate this in your mind, these ups and downs, it's basically a single point in space, and these waves are kind of rolling by it, and that's what's being translated in this here. So they took all this data and then actually converted that into wave height, energy, and power. So they had two control boats. They were water ski boats. 2004 Malibu Response at about 2,400 pounds, and a 2004 Larson at about 2,900 pounds. And I mentioned that because some of the previous studies on boats have shown that the larger, heavier boats do create bigger waves, have bigger impacts. Their wake boats, they had a 2019 Malibu at 4,200 pounds and a 2019 Malibu model at 5,500 pounds. And in the graph on the right, you can see on the y-axis, this is showing the maximum wave height recorded from each of these boats. So the y-axis is the maximum wave height in inches. The x-axis is the operational distance. So 0 is, if they were right on top of the boat when they're measuring the wave height. And then this distance away from that where the boat was operating. The yellow and green dots here are the control boats, and the red and blue dots are the wake boats. And I think a lot of people have probably seen this study before. I'm just doing it for completion's sake. What they found in their summary is that when the wake boats were plowing at that low speed mode, the waves that they measured, the maximum waves, were 2 to 3 times higher than the control boats, with 3 to 9 times more energy and 6 to 12 times more power than the water ski boats. They also found that the mode of operation matters, not just for wake boats, but for all boats. So on the left graph here, this is a water ski boat. On the right graph, this is a wake boat. The blue dots are when the boats are planing, and the orange dots are when the boats are plowing. And so as you can see with both boats, we have a lot more wave energy when the boats are plowing at that low speed than when planing. And that's consistent with some of the other boating studies that Tom discussed earlier. Even when planing, the wake boats were still creating waves with twice as much energy as the control boats at an operational distance of 100 feet away, just as a point of clarification there. And I'll talk more about the study here in a minute, but I just want to touch on the fact that there are, as I mentioned, other studies out there who've been measuring these kind of things, and they're going back quite a ways. Just going to highlight a couple of them here. There was a study in Australia, I think it was on a river in Australia in 2011, that did not find a consistent difference in the wave energies or heights between water ski boats and wake boats. Another study came out from Australia in 2018, and you can see the graph on the right here with kind of a similar layout with the wave height on the y-axis and the distance away from the boat on the x-axis. And this study found that wake boats created waves that had energies 5 to 17 times higher than the control boat, which is a speed boat in this case. And then as Tom mentioned, we've actually been doing some local studies here. We helped the Ashburn Lake Management District do a study last year where we found that when they were wakeboarding at 500 feet from shore, the wave heights were 3 to about 6 times higher than a ski boat at 200 feet from shore. And that ski boat was the same model that was used in the St. Anthony Falls study. When wake surfing at 500 feet from shore, the wave heights were 1.6 to 3.6 times higher. And kind of an interesting factor from that study is that unlike the Minnesota study, which only had one site with one bathymetric slope, we actually had 6 stations across Ashburn Lake, and we saw pretty huge differences between how steep your bathymetric slope was and the wave heights you experienced. So areas that had a very gradual run up had much smaller wave heights from the same boat than areas that had a much steeper bathymetric slope at those sites. And that's also been found in other studies as well. Other studies have also looked at the mode of operation. So a study in Quebec found that when wake surfing, wake boats were 1.7 times higher in wake surfing mode than when they were, again, planing. That's true of a study in 2015, comparing wake surfing was larger than wakeboarding. Some other studies with similar findings, generally all showing that when these boats are operating as designed to create these maximum waves, they are creating larger waves than when they're planing or doing other operations. And again, this graph here shows that kind of operations on the same layout of the height on the y-axis and distance on the x-axis. A lot of these also looked at the how far away these boats have to be to actually dissipate the energy. So the first one I've seen that does this is a study in Quebec they were actually looking at how far away to dissipate the wave energy completely. It's essentially the same as like background wind waves. And they found it took 984 feet to dissipate completely. Most people discuss these waves in comparison with other ski boats or normal boating operations. And that's how those other studies have been designed as well. And so a study in 2021 in Georgia found that to have waves comparable to a ski boat at 100 feet, a wakeboarding boat had to be 225 feet away, and a wake surfing boat had to be 950 feet away. And then the San Anthony Falls study found that for comparable waves to a ski boat at 200 feet, they had to be 500 feet away for wave energy, 575 for wave height, and 600 for comparable wave power. And you can look at that yourself in this graph, just kind of looking at where these red and blue lines intersect these green and yellow lines, essentially, to have that comparable distance. So that's all about the wave energy, and I should say there's a lot more out there that I'm able to discuss today. This is kind of scratching the surface, so I'm just trying to provide some quick highlights and let other speakers talk as well. I'll talk a bit about sediment resuspension. That study in Quebec found that waves from wake boats did cause significant increases in nearshore turbidity compared to no boat activity, but as we know, a lot of other boats also cause significant increases in turbidity compared to no activity whatsoever. There was a recent study on Lake Wawasee in Indiana, which is Indiana's largest natural lake, where they were testing 5 different boat types, just a single pass over the lake, over the study site, at 5, 10, and 15-foot water depths. And they were measuring to see kind of pre and post the boat passing by, was there a significant increase in sediment, nitrogen, phosphorus, and some other parameters. What they found was that the wake boat caused, with only a single pass, a significant increase in total nitrogen at 5 feet, and there was no other significant increase by any other boat or by the wake boat at any deeper depths. And again, if you've done more passes, I'm sure with more energy, you might have stirred up more sediment. This is a single pass study. Kind of an interesting side finding, which makes a lot of sense, is that some of the substrates were much more susceptible to resuspension than others. So finer particle substrates like marl and muck were much more susceptible. Then areas without aquatic plant coverage, that kind of carpet of aquatic plants, were also much more susceptible to resuspension than areas that had a lot of aquatic plant coverage. And we also measured turbidity or sediment resuspension in our Ashipin study in 2023. And we found that wakeboarding at 500 feet from shore did significantly increase turbidity compared to the water ski boat at 200 feet from shore, but wakeboarding at 700 feet and wake surfing were not significantly different from the ski boat in that study. Unfortunately, the San Anthony Falls Phase 2 study is not out yet, and I don't think anyone knows. I don't know any more than anyone else does about this. I will just briefly touch on what they have proposed to do, and I think everyone's looking forward to that coming out here in the next couple months. Essentially, this Phase 2 is going to be evaluating the effects of propeller wash, which you can see as this cone here below the boat, on water mixing and sediment resuspension, trying to answer the questions of how deep does that propeller wash penetrate the water column, at what depth is it interacting with the lake bottom, and what happens once it does interact. Is it actually causing sediment to be resuspended? Is that going to change the water chemistry in a meaningful way? So their approach that they proposed is using 7 different boats, including 2 wake surfing boats, varying the operation, the size, the weight, the power, speed, and pitch at 4 different water depths, 9 feet, 14 feet, 16 feet, and 27 feet, and then essentially driving over these underwater sensors to examine water mixing, and then taking samples, I presume pre and post, to analyze change in chemistry before and after the pass, like that Dagger study I mentioned. But as I said, I don't know any more about this than anyone else does, unfortunately. So I'll have to wait with everyone else for the report to come out here in a couple months, hopefully. So just to quickly sum up some of the major points, as Tom mentioned, all recreational boats do have impacts to lake ecology. We might be seeing minimized impacts because so many of our lakes have been armored over the years, but they do have impacts that are kind of built in at this point in some sense. Some studies have shown that larger, more powerful boats can have greater impacts. There have been quite a few studies looking at wake boats and their impacts. Most of these studies agree that these boats can create, as they're designed to do, larger and more impactful waves than other power boats, that the mode of operation matters for these boats, that these larger waves require greater distance to dissipate their energy, and that factors of the lake bathymetry, the aquatic plant coverage, and the sediment types are important for evaluating how those waves might impact lake ecology. There have been a few studies so far evaluating the impacts on lake ecology, mostly on turbidity and sedimentary suspension, but I think there's a lot more studies forthcoming on that front, especially that phase 2 study from St. Anthony Falls. As Tom mentioned, we have I hopefully every reference that every paper that we referenced in the study is in this references slide. I think these presentations will be made available after this talk, and I guess John can correct me if I'm wrong on that. So this should be here for your perusal. I think that's it for us.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. As we expected, there's a lot of science that has been done, and there's a lot of science left to do. And we thank Sewer Pack and the two of you for staying on top of it and for compiling all of the summary of what you can find as the current science on this viewpoint currently. And as you stated, we are taping the program. The program would be available as well as the slide materials. If anybody requests them, they can call in or make a request. So moving on, the next topic we're going to deal with is the law. And Don Gallo, who I've already indicated to you, coordinated this program, is an environmental lawyer. He's also past president of the Lake Country Clean Waters and Tall Pines, and he's still on both of those boards. So he's very involved in not only the general area of the science and law of the lakes, but also has been working on this topic for us for, I'd say, 6 months or so. So I'm going to move over and let Don take over to deal with the viewpoint of the law.
Thank you, John. I'm going to try to summarize what the state of the law is right now, but it's certainly changing quickly, and we'll be monitoring it as it evolves. First slide, go ahead. Next slide. The first point that I want to make is the public trust doctrine. The public trust doctrine is not a new concept. It's dated back to the Roman Empire in 679 AD, and it was a strong concept in the formation of the 13 colonies in America. The wharfs out into the ocean were deemed to be part of the public trust. And so it is embodied in the Wisconsin Constitution, and it really is the foundation of water law in Wisconsin. And I want to read the sentence that establishes the public trust in the Constitution. It's the river Mississippi and the navigable waters leading into and the carrying places between the same shall be common highways and forever free, as well to the inhabitants of the state as to the citizens of the United States, without any tax, impost, or duty thereof. This forms the foundation of the public trust doctrine in Wisconsin. Next slide. The public trust doctrine is further developed and interpreted by courts, provides that navigable waters are held in trust by the state for the benefit of the public. Courts have interpreted the doctrine to require the Wisconsin legislature to protect the citizens' rights to navigate and enjoy recreational activities in the waters of the state. The Wisconsin legislature and the DNR have promulgated statutes and regulations intended to further define and enforce the public trust doctrine, and it comes up in cases on an annual basis. So it's really alive, and I like to explain it as Similar to the air we breathe and groundwater, they're also part of the natural resources that are in the public trust. Next slide. In general, persons are free to use the waters of the state for recreational purposes so long as that use does not interfere with the ability of others to exercise their right to use and enjoy the waters of the state. In recent years, the generation of artificially enhanced boat wake has come into scrutiny for its damaging impacts to the natural ecosystem of waterways and to shoreline property and the ability of others to use and enjoy the waterways. Chapter 30 of the Wisconsin statutes governs navigable waters, and there's a ton of cases that interpret Chapter 30. However, the subchapter 5 provides for the regulation of boating, and there's really not a lot of cases or interpretation of the boating regulations. Section 30.68 prohibits certain manners of operating boats. Sub A and B prohibit creating hazardous wake and or wash. There's no interpretation that I'm aware of that defines what a hazardous wake or wash. But sub A says no person shall operate a motorboat so as to approach or pass another boat in a manner as to create a hazardous wake or wash. Sub B, an operator of a motorboat is liable for any damage caused to that person or property of another by the wake or wash from such motorboat unless the negligence of such other person was the primary cause of the damage. I think this section is probably unenforceable because you have two issues. You've got to prove causation, and then you have to defend that the other party was negligent in terms of the harm they incurred. So I think it's going to be very difficult to bring a case in this regard. Next slide. During 2023 and 2024, the legislative session, the Wisconsin legislature and the Senate each proposed legislation that would add restrictions on enhanced wake generation. These proposed bills did not go very far. First bill is Senate Bill 1016, which had restrictions on enhanced wake generation. The second bill was Assembly Bill 656 and a companion Senate Bill 680, and that had restrictions on wakeboarding and wake surfing. Next slide. Senate Bill 1016 added provisions to Section 30.68 to restrict the areas in which enhanced wake generation is allowed. So there are three common elements. That this proposed bill was prohibited on lakes smaller than 1,500 acres. It was prohibited on lakes with a maximum depth of less than 20 feet, and it's prohibited within 700 feet from shore or from any other boat, swimmer, or any other individual using the water. This again will be difficult to enforce. Next slide. Assembly Bill 656 added provisions to Section 30.69, which currently governs water skiing to restrict wakeboarding and wake surfing activities. The bill said that no person may wakeboard or wake surf on a body of water that is 50 acres or less on a portion of the body of water with a width, this is complex, measured to the second nearest shoreline that is less than 400 feet and within 200 feet of the shore or dock, pier, boathouse, or other structure. Both of these, next slide, both of these bills did not progress out of committee phase, and so they really didn't get started. If the state I'm sorry, can you hear me? If the state government does not take action on this issue, it remains to be seen exactly what the final form of a state restriction would be. I doubt that there'll be state legislation. Next slide. Some municipalities in Wisconsin have taken action on this issue by passing local ordinances restricting, prohibiting the generation of artificially enhanced waste within municipal boundaries. Wisconsin law gives municipalities the authority to enact local ordinances regulating watercraft use on their lakes in the interest of public health, safety, or welfare, including the public's interest in preserving the state's natural resources. Next slide. Municipal ordinances that pertain to the use or operation of a boat on an inland lake is invalid unless one of the following occurs. Number one, all towns, villages, and cities having jurisdiction over the lake have enacted an identical ordinance, or at least 50% of the towns, villages, and cities having jurisdiction over the lake have enacted an identical ordinance, and at least 60% of the shoreline is within the boundaries of the towns, villages, and cities. And several municipalities are enacting such ordinances, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Counties cannot regulate watercraft on lakes, but counties can regulate watercraft on rivers. Next slide. Public inland protection and rehabilitation districts or sanitary districts may enact and enforce ordinances in the same fashion as municipalities if one of the following occurs. Number one, each town, village, and city having jurisdiction over the lake adopts a resolution authorizing the Lake District Sanitary District to do so. Or two, at least 50% of the towns, villages, and cities having jurisdiction over the lake adopt resolutions authorizing the Lake District or Sanitary District to enact and enforce ordinances, and at least 60% of the shoreline is within the boundaries of these towns and villages. Next slide. Ordinances related to the equipment, use, or operation of boats on inland lakes are subject to review by DNR. The proposed ordinances must be submitted to DNR at least 60 days prior to final enactment. DNR will review the ordinance and advise the municipality in writing of the results of the review no more than 20 days after receipt of the proposed ordinance. Next slide. Two general approaches have emerged for local ordinances restricting artificially enhanced boat wakes. In the northern portion of the state, many municipalities have chosen to implement blanket bans on the generation of artificially enhanced wake generation. In the southern portion of the state, many municipalities have adopted a standards-based approach ordinance similar to the proposed statewide legislation, which allow for generation of artificially enhanced wakes only when certain conditions are met, such as lake size, lake depth, distance from shore. Many of the southern lakes have chosen not to do ordinances, but rather guidance documents requiring voluntary compliance, and that seems to be working. Next slide. Enhanced wake generation, local regulation. So sample ordinance language requires two things. You can have prohibited equipment, so no person may use or employ ballast tanks, ballast bags, or fins to cause a boat to operate in a bow-high manner or which increases or enhances a boat's weight. The second element is prohibited operation. No person may operate a boat in an artificially bow-high manner, having the effect of increasing the boat's weight. Such prohibited operation shall include wake enhancement by use of ballast tanks or ballast bags and fins, or continuous operation at transition speed below the planing speed of the boat. There are certain operations that are not prohibited or are allowed. In no event shall any of the following operations be deemed a violation of the ordinance, provided such operations do not employ ballast tanks, water bags, or wake enhancing fins. Water skiing, tubing, wakeboarding, employing a tow rope, or brief transition operation of an empty boat of bilge water, and brief transition operation of a boat accelerating into a planing condition. Next slide. 33 municipalities have enacted ordinances that prohibited artificially enhanced wake generation, 18 of which were implemented in 2024. All but 6 of these ordinances constitute a complete prohibition on at least one lake. Some legal challenges to these ordinances have already been brought, with more likely to follow as more municipalities enact similar ordinances. Next slide. Litigation challenging some of the local ordinances has already commenced, although there's no active litigation that I'm aware of, and the cases that were brought have been resolved. Previous court rulings have held that across-the-board regulation by boat size, type of boat, or horsepower have been considered an unwarranted restriction on public rights. To date, there have been no court decisions in Wisconsin ruling on the validity of ordinance of this kind. 2 of the most closely related cases on this issue are Bingo versus City of Hurley and Menzer versus Lake. In the interest of time, I'm going to move through these quickly. Bingo was a municipal ordinance that prohibited bathing, boating, and swimming in the lake because the city of Hurley wanted to use the lake as a water supply. That was really a takings case, and it was concluded that that ordinance did not survive. It was overruled. Next case, or next slide. Menzer versus Elkhart Lake is an ordinance that did survive and exists today. And this is an ordinance where Elkhart Lake has a limitation on power boats on a Sunday. And the court determined that it permitted a limited regulation of competing water uses in the interest of public safety, where such regulation is necessity by the local condition. So you can see these ordinances are very specific to local lakes and conditions. Next slide. Enhanced wake generation enforceability. We've talked to the wardens about this. The wardens do not have authority to enforce local ordinances, and those local ordinances have to be enforced by local municipal governments. Next slide. Wake surfing utilizes large ballast tanks to help them plow through the water to generate larger wakes. When these ballast tanks are not properly emptied and cleaned, they can serve as conduits for the transfer of invasive species between lakes. The Wisconsin Administrative Code, NR19, requires any person to remove a boat from that body of water. Diligent enforcement of NR19 can help protect our water resources from invasive species. Next slide. In conclusion, the issue of artificially enhanced boat wakes and the resulting harmful effects has gained more attention over recent years. I'm sure we'll see more ordinances and also more litigation on this topic. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Don. And I'm sure that's just a snippet of the law. And as you said, there's a lot more that probably will develop over the next few years. Our next viewpoint is what we've called the coalition's position. And a member of the Lakes at Stake Wisconsin board, Joe Garstecki, has been asked by our board. The board felt it was very important to allow the coalition to present their position, and Joe has graciously agreed to do that tonight. So I turn it over to Joe. Thank you, Joe, for coming.
Sure. Thanks, John. I'm very pleased to be here. Now, before I begin, think we need to do a little sound test because we had a little trouble before we started. John, if can you tell me if there's that same delay or am I coming through clearly?
We may have an automatic delay, but we do not notice it. You might notice it as a speaker, but we don't notice it in your presentation. So please feel free to proceed.
Okay, great. Paul, are you controlling the slides for me?
Yep.
Okay, if you could bring up slide 1, thanks. Just a quick introduction, and again, I really appreciate this opportunity. So, Lakes at Stake was formed about a year ago, half a dozen board members, and from the beginning, we took a stance that we felt that legislative action would probably be required to get something moving in a serious manner. And by the way, those first 3 presentations were great. And Don, you did a good job of explaining what happened last year with that late in the year attempt at legislation. So again, just back to the slides, Paul, if we could, maybe pop right over to slide number 2 while we're waiting for that. So what, we've got a platform and it involves using the resources available in Madison in the form of lobbying the legislature in both the Senate and the House to help us with this issue because it's pretty apparent that it's a large issue and it's becoming bigger. Now, I can't see the screen with my slides yet, Paul. I don't know if anyone else can. John, what do you see?
At the station here, we see your first slide.
Okay, and I'm not for whatever reason, but that's fine. And I don't have a copy of them. But so slide number 2, I think, just tells you a little bit about Lakes at Stake, our mission statement, what we're trying to accomplish. Slide number 3, I believe. Okay, so other people are saying that they're not seeing the slides either. So maybe we can just take a moment to try to straighten that out. There we go. All right. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so we are a nonprofit. We are bipartisan. We think this is a bipartisan issue. We are concerned about the use of wake boats and wake surfing, particularly on the medium to small lakes in Wisconsin. So that's why we got this started in the first place. We have people on the board from all over the state. And we've made a lot of progress. And this coalition that John described is our latest effort at pushing forward. Next slide, please. So again, our focus is on the legislature. There are, as Don mentioned, 33 states that are lakes that have enacted legislation already or ordinances, but it's a slow crawl. And I think there are significant differences between northern Wisconsin and southern Wisconsin in the way this issue is addressed. So we feel that the state establishing minimum standards would be very important in this case. Next slide, or I should say on this issue. Okay, so why did we form this coalition? Well, we had a lot of good people all around Wisconsin, different groups all over the place that were trying to do similar things that we were trying to do, but in different ways, on different levels, with different approaches. And we weren't butting heads, but we weren't presenting a unified message. So we felt if we could bring people together, agree on some core concepts, it would strengthen our efforts in Madison. So it was pretty obvious to us that, as individual groups approaching different people in Madison, we didn't have the force and the visibility that we needed. So bringing together this group, which is now at about 45 members, has provided some heft for us. And when I say a common approach, some people were attacking the issue of invasive species transfer. Others were talking about the social issues involved with, public trust doctrine. Other people were talking about ecological damage. So now we brought it all together and we put it into one common statement, and that's our mission. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we want to maintain the ability to enact local ordinances, but Don alluded to it again. I've been to many of these town board meetings around the state, and people are trying to get something done. It's not easy, and there has been a threat of lawsuits out there. Nothing has materialized in the form of lawsuits, but the threats are there, and I don't blame the town boards for being concerned about that. So we are proposing minimums across the state, while at the same time protecting each lake's PRD or whatever association is overseeing the lake to continue to be able to modify and enforce their own ordinances that they feel are important on their particular lake. Next slide. So these are our key pillars, just briefly, and again, they've been mentioned, 700 feet from shore, which is predominantly based on the Minnesota study, 30 feet of water or greater, again, a few studies indicating that downward thrust of the propeller can reach down quite some distance. That ballast tank should be decontaminated before moving from lake to lake, and that local towns maintain their power for local ordinances. Next slide. So 47 groups. One of the following slides gives an indication of those groups, their names, what kind of organizations they are, and they are diverse. There are organizations such as Last Wilderness Alliance, our group, Lakes at Stake. There are PRDs that have joined. There are muskie fishermen. There are boaters groups, yachting groups. And so what we've done is we bring everyone together. Each of these groups have a representative, and then we have a steering committee that listens to those representatives. It's very democratic. The steering committee then discusses and adopts and votes on a platform. And that's what you just saw on the previous slide. That's our current platform. And there's no cost to join the coalition. It obviously represents a lot of voter power, if you will. And it gives us a much stronger presence in front of the individuals that we're trying to reach in Madison. Next slide, please. So here's a list of those 47, and I'll just give you 30 seconds to kind of run your eyes over what sort of organizations have decided to join. And this is happening pretty quickly. I mean, we brought these groups together in about 90 days, and we expect that many, many more will join. And there is strength in numbers. And a lot of the people in these organizations are so happy that there's now a common front, that there's a voice, that there's a group that they can turn to provide that some boots on the ground in Madison, if you will, on their behalf. Okay, next slide. So this is what we're trying to accomplish as not only Lakes at Stake, but with the help of this coalition. Educate anybody that needs help in assembling their opposition to wake boat use on their lakes or wake surfing, to educate legislators and the governor's office, and to work toward getting something introduced when the legislature reconvenes in early January. Next. Okay, thanks a lot. And again, John, I appreciate the opportunity to share this information.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe, for presenting the position of the coalition and the information for our members. I'm sure they found it to be very interesting. I, in particular, as you know, met with members of your board personally and gave my comments on the pillars. And I think that obviously they're well thought out And we'll see, what the legislature does in that regard. The next viewpoint we wanted to present was that of a wake boat enthusiast, the perspective from a boater. And it's sort of an interesting story. We all know how this works. I'm at a fundraiser. I'm talking to a gentleman I've never met before in my life. And the next thing you know, he's presenting here as the interested citizen. Has a great background, and I don't know if he had too many drinks or I had too many drinks, but no, we really weren't drinking much that night. But we did have a good conversation about wake boating, and he comes from a very diverse background, wearing different hats that he'll tell you about. And so we interviewed him, and Don invited him to present the wakeboat enthusiast viewpoint tonight. So we have Phil Jakubowski, and we'll let you tell more how you're involved in this and all the different hats that you wear, Phil. But thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. Hopefully everybody can hear me all right. So I'm Phil Jakubowski. I am a lifetime resident of Little Muskego Lake, our little 500 or so acre lake here in southeast Wisconsin. With that being said, I've seen everything happen throughout all the years of my life out here. I've seen shoreline erosion. I've seen increase in traffic. I've seen all sorts of things. But at this point, I'm coming to you as a wake boat enthusiast. Little background on me as well. I served 5 years as the president of the Muskego Waterbug ski team, which is a competitive ski team here based on Little Muskego Lake. I'm also a towboat driver for them. I'm a licensed towboat driver for competitions. So I have a little bit kind of a diverse background there. Anyway, I started wake surfing back in 2002. I was up doing a wakeboard lesson up in Fremont, Wisconsin, and the instructor had gotten a surfboard in the mail that day. So we went out and figured out how to do it. And from that point on, I was hooked. And when I got home, we figured out how to use my standard ski boat to surf behind it, and it all started from there. So it's been a great experience. Anyway, so a lot of the information here, great information. The boats, yes, they are there to create a larger, more powerful wave. That being considered, the depth that we need for surfing, it really comes into play. So as a surfer, we don't see a really good wave creation until we hit about 15 feet of water. In that 15 feet of water, I would love to see what prop wash actually does to the bottom of a lake when that study comes out, because that is something I don't personally see it. We have a very muddy lake, and when we're traveling at surfing speeds, just for information, surfing speeds vary from 10.5 to about 14 miles an hour. Anything less than that, there's no power. Anything more than that, the wave kind of collapses. But me personally, I travel at 10.5 in my boat. And at those speeds, we see no muck getting kicked up from the bottom of the lake. We don't see any weeds coming out behind it. Our lake management is pretty good with taking care of the weeds out here. But anyway, we need 15 feet of water to create that wave and to actually do what we want to do. And that's going to hold true for wakeboarding as well. When the wakeboard boats have ballast in them, they're going to need the deeper water, the better. Otherwise, I'm not an engineer. I don't know hydrodynamics, but I can tell you what I've seen personally. When I have ballast in my boat traveling in shallower water, there is no wave. It does not exist. I think the pressure from the boat on the bottom of the lake doesn't allow the boat to sink as much. So that's where we lose the wave at. But anyway, coming down to that, I spoke this week with our Lake District president, who has been involved in the Lake District for the past 6 years. And in those 6 years on our small little lake that I would argue is probably one of the busiest ones around, especially considering its size, he has received 0 complaints regarding surf boats, the wakes they create, shoreline erosion, anything along that line. Personally, shoreline erosion and shoreline problems I've seen on my own property. I live in the house that I grew up in. not lowering the lake for winter, and the ice pushing in tears apart everybody's shorelines. And really the increase in traffic. The traffic I've seen out on this lake in my lifetime has increased exponentially, to the point of a lot of the times we can't even go out and enjoy the water ourselves, not because of surfers, but because of everybody else out on the lake. But I've been out surfing, like I said, since 2002. I bought a specialized wake surf boat in 2017. There's an entire industry around wake surfing and wakeboarding. A lot of boat manufacturers that produce ski boats in the past, they don't even produce those anymore. They produce boats like mine that are for surfing, for wakeboarding. So there's an entire industry. So I can understand the concern of people coming about now with, noticing it more, because there's a lot more of them. I mean, they far outnumber the regular ski boats on our lake, which has been the change I've seen, again, in my lifetime. But anyway, going back to some of the things here that have been considered. Give me a second here. Sorry, I'm not as prepared as a presenter as some of you. I mean, the main issue I see when it comes down to erosion, like I said, is really the traffic. Our lake, we have, fishermen, we have a fishing tournament, we have jet skiers. We won't even get into jet skiers at this time. But, a lot of people, it's uneducated when it comes to the laws of boating and, common courtesy in that when it comes to waterways, with what we see and what I've personally seen with, something that would probably impact erosion more than anything is just the traffic and the people just not, obeying the current laws that are out there. Our boats, with the small section on our lake that we can surf on, the waves are pretty much dissipated by the time they hit shoreline. Seeing the studies in that with how long it takes the waves to dissipate, there's a really broad selection of boats that are out there with the size. Horsepower doesn't really come into play when it comes to surfing. The torque does, but the overall size of the boat, the weight, and all that leads to the different types of wake enhancement. So some of the things that were pointed out before with wake enhancement when it comes down to ballast systems, wedges, they also have tabs that come out on the back of boats. Really what we're trying to achieve to get a good surfing wave is where the wave converges behind the boat. We just kind of do a delayed convergence. And by doing that, we create this wave that we can actually ride on, which is a lot of fun if you haven't done it. I've taken people out on the boat that absolutely hated wake surfers and everything that we stand for, and we've taken them out surfing. And at the end of their day on the boat, they understood completely why we do it, and they became fans themselves. It's a very low impact sport when it comes to, a lot of us who have been in water sports our entire life. It's not a huge impact to our bodies. We can do it pretty easily and without getting hurt, which is a important thing for me at 46. And it's not just the wake boats that are out there now. There are jet skis that are being created to create a wave. There's pontoon boats out there to create a wave. I've seen people surfing behind things that are highly dangerous to surf behind. And, as a courtesy to them, I've pulled up to them and said, hey, you know what, you really shouldn't be doing that. You're going to get hurt, and we don't want you to wreck this industry and what we enjoy and what we love to do. Most people had choice words for us when we were advised them on what they're doing is dangerous. I won't share those with you today, but you can imagine. But touching on emptying ballast tanks and the invasive species, on our lake in particular, we probably have pretty much all the invasive species that there can be. With it being so busy, so much public access, we've had everything out here. And the species that I think how they've gotten transferred to our lake in particular is probably through fishing boats. Not to single them out, but I know a lot of fishermen that travel lake to lake in the same day. when the wake surfers go anywhere, they kind of stick to their own lake where they know the water, they know the water depth. Again, going back to the 15 feet that we need to create that wave. They're going to go to where they know what they like to do and where they know other people. And a lot of the people, you know, they invest a lot of money in these boats. I mean, you're getting your feet wet at about $60,000 all the way up to probably $500,000 for one of these wake boats. So with that being considered, looking at the one study that showed these boats operating in 5 feet of water, if somebody's operating their wake boat in 5 feet of water, it comes down to education. There's no way a ballasted boat could even take off in 5 feet of water. I mean, it's just not going to happen. They're going to stir up so much bottom and ruin their prop in the process. But you know, the live wells and that you see in fishing boats, you know, back before wake boats, that's when we started getting stuff into this lake. And I'm gonna guess a lot of the invasive stuff is coming from them. The wake surfers that I know on and off of our lake throughout this part of Wisconsin, you know, highly respectful of everybody. And when we make our big waves in that, we try and stay away from people. We don't do anything to try and, you know, make people angry or try and swamp a boat. I have personally seen people try and cause problems in the process of us enjoying our waterways. And at that point, a lot of us just stop doing it. We stop, and, you know, we don't want to cause any problems. We are out there to enjoy it just as everybody else is. We just have a different way of doing it. But that is pretty much all that I have to say about all of this. I appreciate the time here, and hopefully I didn't ramble too much. I didn't read from any of my prepared stuff really, except for some few key points, but I do appreciate you allowing me the platform here to share my views.
Thank you, Phil. We appreciate you taking the time and putting together your thoughts on this topic. I'm sure many of our over 60 participants here at the meeting tonight have never surfed or never had the experience, so I think it was important for you to present and to set forth your perspectives to the memberships. And again, thank you. You sort of segue to the topic that I'm going to talk about now, and that's ancillary issues. It's interesting that as we've been working on this since I think Don last April or May, and started to reach out to people to gather information and decide what topics, all of a sudden people started to talk to Don and I about what we called ancillary issues. And we thought it was important not to dwell on them, but to mention them, to have you think about them as you all deal with this issue on your lakes or in your communities, because they're going to become important. And I can tell you one way that they're going to become important is because the judges are going to look to these ancillary issues and say, how can you ask us to regulate wake enhancement when in this fashion, when wake and shoreline issues are occurring by other factors as well? So these are things that people called me about and just said, what about? And they talked about what about current weed cutting practices, and if you're concerned about the release of the phosphorus, I mean, isn't that a concern with the weed cutting if they're cutting too deep? What about the use of barges? This was a fascinating one that had never dawned on me. We have a lot of barge activity on the lakes nowadays with the construction of, well, it was always with the shoreline construction oftentimes, but now with the permanent piers and the permanent docks, we see a lot more barge action, and we see them loaded with a lot of material and causing, talk about wake enhancement. They've loaded up these barges. They're now causing a great deal of wake action, and in some cases, shoreline damage. The permanent docks themselves, there are people questioning what effect they're going to have on the fishing and things. And of course, I've already commented on the construction of them and the problems. the water ski shows themselves, which are extremely popular, but we know that they're putting not your typical motors on the back of those boats to do the ski shows, and I can assure you that in litigation the issue is going to be raised as to, if you're regulating us, why are you allowing the water ski shows to have an enhanced wake and do potential damage to the shoreline also. Power boats have always been able to be driven in such a manner as to make an enhanced wake if they don't plane out. Now, normally, of course, they want to plane out, and they want to, go as fast as they can for most part. And when they're doing that, they're not generally making an enhanced wake. But powerboats in and of themselves, as all of us know who've lived on lakes, I've been on for 50 years, know that powerboats in and themselves can have create an enhanced wake situation. Sewer Pack did a wonderful job in their presentation talking about just natural waves activity and high winds and things causing shoreline damage. So again, we weren't of a mind to want to delve into these or to make a bigger deal out of these issues, but those of you who are thinking about legislation should also think about the litigation side of it, as Don has talked about the law, and talk about the other issues that are caused by wake enhancement activities other than merely surfing. And we thought, the question was raised, what is an acceptable level of boating impacts? And that's really what we're talking about tonight. And Don talked about the current laws, and the coalition talked about future laws. And we just, as a body, as a board, wanted everybody to think about these other issues a little bit also. So with that, again, we're not going to belabor it. We just wanted to raise and have people be mindful of those other potential issues. And so now we're going to turn back to Don a little bit, who's going to talk about some of the Lake Pewaukee Sanitary District issues. And then there are some slides. I don't know if we're going to get through those slides or not because of time, but we're going to at least just touch a little bit. I think this touches a little bit into depth on some of these ancillary issues. So I'm going to switch seats with Don, and I'll let him take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, John. This presentation was developed by Tom Kepp, and I asked Tom to, I've been working with him on these issues, and he was essentially stressing out over it, and I asked him to give us a perspective. He hasn't been able to do that yet tonight, but I'll fill in for him. When we do the first slide. I think the biggest issue that comes about in developing an ordinance is the threat of litigation. Even though we can win the litigation, it's not going to be a problem, it's going to be costly. And so most lake management districts or most municipalities have to think about this long and hard. And I think that's what drives a lot of lakes to developing a guidance document as opposed to hard and fast ordinances. The threat of litigation. Can we go to let's go to these points. Tom was concerned. He was trying to do, Tom is the manager of Lake Pewaukee Sanitary District. And what he was trying to do is address this issue for all concerned. And his board asked him to tone it down and maybe look at a guidance document as opposed to an ordinance. First of all, these are the challenges, and this is what I asked Tom to speak on. What are the challenges of the lake manager? So let's go to the next slide. This is a slide that just shows some views of Lake Pewaukee. And you all know how riled up a lake can be. Let's go to the next slide. And some of these waves are naturally occurring due to the weather. Can we go to the next slide? And this is a slide that Tom put together showing all the different things that go on Lake Milwaukee. I see in the upper left-hand corner, these are tubers, and this is the lake water ski group. And then these mounds of weeds are from lake cutting. And I think Tom operates 4 lake cutting machines on Lake Milwaukee. Next slide. This is the type of thing that most lake managers are involved with in terms of clarity via collecting data on various areas of the lake and also analyzing water quality at different depths. Let's go to the next slide. And I think this slide was intended to show on the left a fairly clear lake area, and then on the right hand side, a more turbid view. Let's go to the next slide. Can you do the next slide? This is the area that Tom and others on the lake have looked at in terms of where they felt wake enhancement would be not a problem on Lake Milwaukee. And this would be part of the guidance document that they are promoting. Next slide. These are just activities that go on most lakes. Next slide. It hits the water. Oh, it's a 9.8. These are activities that Tom is involved in, mostly non-profit organizations. The town of Delafield, the city of Milwaukee, the village of Milwaukee, all have a piece of Lake Milwaukee. The Milwaukee River Partnership, Milwaukee's Women's Club, Milwaukee's Kiwanis, Milwaukee Water Ski Club, and the Milwaukee chapter of Walleyes for Tomorrow. Tom is very active in that. And then this shows the Lakefront Water Festival that is conducted every June. Next slide. I guess that's it. But I think the point is, it's a challenge being a lake management person, and you've got a lot of different interests to address. I think what we'll move into now is addressing questions. Thank you.
So, thank you, Don. We're hoping that we were able to give you different viewpoints and a lot of good information about the issue. I can tell you our schedule for next year. Our next quarterly meeting, the county is doing an update on the excuse me for a second, an invasive species, and they're going to present their findings, their updated report and their findings at the next meeting. That'll be important for all of the lake districts to have representation at that meeting. They also will talk about the program that they run for checking boats and things like that. And so we'll get information out on that. We also have the Healthy Lakes Conference scheduled for September. Don has agreed to do a follow-up meeting as soon as the study is completed, and the people doing the study in Minnesota have agreed to Zoom into the meeting and present the study when it's completed. And then, of course, we've also mentioned the Pewaukee Water Festival, which is one of our big programs throughout the year. So they've been typed into the chat that we are recording, and it'll be shared during the week. The slides will also be available. One good way to make sure that you can get the slides and everything is we will be sending out a survey asking what you think of the program and asking what you would like to see in future programs. And so, and we'll give you an opportunity when you send back your report to also make sure that if you need the slides or would like to see the slides or have the slides, how to get the slides. Lastly, we're hoping to get started a program that's been in the works for many years, and that's a program for all the lake districts and homeowners association and clubs to have an opportunity to get together as a group, maybe even once a month, virtually, to share ideas and concerns as the separate bodies. So all of this is what Lake Country Clean Waters is currently working on. We don't have questions. So with that, we thank you all for joining us tonight. And please remember to do the send back the survey. Your feedback is well wanted, well respected, and needed in order for us to decide future programming. Again, thank you. Happy holidays to all, and have a good evening.